Health Executive within CDC. Stephanie Seneff. Dr. Seneff is a senior research scientist at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. She has a BS degree in biology and a PhD in electrical engineering and computer science, both from MIT. Her recent interests have focused on the role of toxic chemicals and micronutrient deficiencies in health, with a special emphasis on the pervasive herbicide Roundup and the mineral sulfur. She's published over 24 peer-reviewed journal papers over the past few years on these topics. Polley Tommey. Polley Tommey is the mother of Billy, a 20-year-old with autism. She's a book author, founding editor-in-chief of the world's preeminent autism magazine, The Autism File, and Autism Media Channel's TV host and award-winning documentary film producer, Who Killed Alex Bordalakis. She is also a producer on Vaxxed. Last but not least, Andrew Wakefield. Over 140 scientific papers, many of them not causing quite so much. In 1995, he was contacted by parents of autistic children with stomach issues. He learned that these conditions often occurred immediately following an MMR vaccine. In pursuit of this possible link, he led an initial study of 12 children with both stomach and developmental issues. The report, published in The Lancet, would catapult Wakefield into becoming one of the most controversial figures in the history of medicine. Vaxxed is his second film. Just have a few short remarks, if you'll indulge me, before we open up to questions with our panelists. If there are two things any good journalist should know, it's number one, that settled science is a propaganda term, not a scientific term. Oftentimes, the effort made by others to keep questions from being asked is directly proportional to the importance of the questions. In the 1930s, many recognized cigarettes as a risk for lung cancer. Studies confirmed it in the 1940s and 50s, while for years, many in the industry, government, and medical field continued to dig in their heels and dispute the evidence. An orchestrated propaganda campaign, including industry-backed studies, successfully confused the public and even doctors who should have known better. Think of this, as late as 1960, only 1/3 of doctors surveyed believed cigarettes were a culprit in lung cancer. 2/3 didn't think so. Not long ago, two former editors-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine wrote a remarkable letter in the British Medical Journal. They expressed alarm at the extent to which research partnerships between industry and academics, that's corporations and universities, are leading to questionable science and conflicts of interest that are often ignored or excused, they said, by prestigious medical journals like the New England Journal of Medicine. About the same time, Richard Morton, the editor-in-chief of British journal Lancet, issued an equally remarkable statement. Quote, "The case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue." That's an extraordinary statement from the editor of a medical journal. He went on to say, quote, "Afflicted by studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analyses, and flagrant conflicts of interest, science has taken a turn towards darkness." In 2013, Japan stopped recommending HPV cervical cancer vaccine due to adverse event concerns. But a scientist published an article last year claiming Japan had succumbed to nothing more than a silly overreaction to media hype. The lead author of that article reported receiving no compensation from vaccine makers. That would be an obvious conflict of interest. Because the article read to me like a press release promoting HPV vaccines, and used key astroturf language dismissing public concerns, I dug around a little. I learned the scientist, the one who reported no vaccine funding, had previously disclosed that she did get some. Further, she also received funding from something called the Japanese Expert Board for the Eradication of Cervical Cancer, which received significant financial support from GlaxoSmithKline and Merck, the vaccines being discussed. When I contacted the scientist, she insisted she'd made the proper disclosures. But when I brought it to the attention of the medical journal where the article was published, which happened to be Lancet, they investigated and confirmed my conclusions, and to their credit, issued a correction. When it comes to the study focused on in Vaxxed, I won't be surprised to hear CDC emerge with a reanalysis of the reanalysis and brand new explanations for what their own scientists seem to indicate was fraud on their part. There's always another way to crunch the number, to shift the data, to change the sample, to get the desired results. Insiders, just like CDC's Dr. Bill Thompson, report these tactics have sadly become research tools of the trade. I won't be surprised to hear Dr. Thompson someday recast his comments and conclusions, and it would be hard to blame him. After all, he remains odd man out, still working inside the federal agency he blew the whistle on, still working alongside senior colleagues and CDC officials he accused of misconduct, only to find out nobody really cared, at least cared enough to report it in the news media, or cared enough on Capitol Hill to call a hearing and ask questions. Shame on journalists for regurgitating without question one-sided and often false information told to us by those we consider authorities. And worse, shame on us for censoring the topic entirely because we've declared it to be closed. As an investigative journalist, I find the issues at hand today are typical of many stories I've covered. There are questions of corporate malfeasance, government corruption, and scientific fraud. History, experience, journalism, and common sense teach us it's rarely a bad idea to ask questions. And when some work so hard to silence the questions, their motivations have to be explored. So that's my... For the first question, I'm going to direct at Andy Wakefield. You had a comment that you wanted to make?
Sharyl, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. In the Academy Awards, they made it quite clear that the magic of a movie is made in the editing room, and there's someone here who's done an immense amount of work for many years on this film who doesn't get up on stage, but was very, very much in large part responsible for this movie. Brian Burrows. Brian, I can't see you. Somewhere in the audience, in the lunch.
Think of your questions, but I'm going to start off with a question for each of our panelists. First, Andrew Wakefield, the film doesn't address you as a controversial figure too much as perhaps it's been discussed before. But in fact, you've been called one of the most reviled doctors in the world. How are you able to believe what you say now, and why are you pursuing this cause?
Thank you, Sharyl. Yeah. The most reviled doctor in the world. How about that on your headstone? Yeah, lies to revile. Yeah. You know, I love this because it's not about me. This story is not about me at all, and I don't hope that comes through. This is nothing to do with me. The media try and make it about me, and they try and default back to that, everything that's happened in the past, and all the lies that have been told by Brian Deere and Rupert Murdoch's media. But this movie is not about me. It's about William Thompson coming forward from the CDC and confessing to what amounts to the most serious fraud in medical history. That's what the story is about. People should not be distracted from that. People should not believe the media when they see this film without ever, review this film without ever having seen it, and continue that dialogue about what happened to me in the past. This is a film about malfeasance, about fraud at the Centers for Disease Control. What I want to see come out of this is an end to this epidemic. And whatever the definitive cause of autism is, that lies somewhere within the vaccine schedule, and that needs to be resolved. We've got to put an end to this epidemic, and we've got to do it now. We will never get a better chance in an election year when for the first time in the history of the world we have an insider from the CDC saying, in effect, that we committed a very serious fraud. I want to see justice for those who've been damaged. I want to see proper medical investigation for those who've been damaged. I want to see a future for those who've already been damaged. Justice is a very difficult thing to pin down because no one would give anything to live in the shoes of a child or an adult affected by autism or their family. So justice will elude them forever, I fear, but there must be some recognition of what has happened and due compensation.
Bigtree, I'm wondering, what's been the response among colleagues and medical professionals you've worked with? Do you think this is or will hurt your career? And did people tell you not to touch the subject?
Almost everyone around me told me not to touch this subject. And I had those thoughts go through your mind. I say when I was sitting in Andy's basement, I flew myself down after having met him, and I said I wanted to see what he was working on. And there really wasn't much of a choice. I mean, you just saw, a refined version of what I saw, the most important story of my lifetime. This makes Watergate look like a child's game. And people come up and they say, you're a hero that you took this on. I'm just a journalist. This is what journalists are supposed to do. It's my job description. The fact that we've reached the point in the United States of America where you're looking at the, 6 or 7 people that thought this was a story is terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. I've said it before, journalism is often considered the fourth estate or the fourth branch of government. It's our job as journalists to hold everybody firm in truth and to challenge the status quo and to never be afraid of any story when it comes to our government, when it comes to our industry, when it comes to the lives of children. Nothing is off the table. And yet, every journalist that's writing in every major newspaper right now, and most of our news stations, I think Fox gets a pass after a really great interview. But I also want to give credit because it's also about education. It's about how we're raised. And I was lucky enough to have 2 parents that raised me to always question authority when it goes against my own intuition. Mom, Dad, you guys are here too. Yeah. So I will say that when it was announced, I had just done an interview on ABC. I was expecting to see my first big TV interview talking about Tribeca. When it was announced that we had been pulled from the festival, and I saw this statement by Robert De Niro sort of denouncing the film, there was about 30 seconds where I thought, there just went my career. And then shortly after that, you realize, well, now I have nothing to lose. So let's go get them.
participating in the process in your view, and what people may not know about the whole thing?
Well, this is a movie about corruption. This is a story of corruption. The autism epidemic is a catastrophe that came about because the medical industrial complex cannot govern itself. You have Julie Gerberding going from running Centers of Disease Control to being the president of the Merck vaccine division in a year. That's a florid conflict of interest. Another, you mentioned Paul Offit. Paul Offit is a Merck-made millionaire. He patented, I have nothing against patents, but that's how the drug companies make money, is they patent and protect their medicines and their biologics, and no one can compete with them, and they can charge higher prices. Paul Offit, along with two other inventors, invented the Rototec vaccine. They licensed that to Merck, and he did that at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which is a hospital. Well, hospitals are nonprofits. They're commercial enterprises. And the Worcester Institute, which is another research institute and supposedly expert on medical issues. And the research team, I've done some calculations. I think Paul Offit, through a variety of things, and I wrote an article on this, Offit cashes in, that I recommend on Age of Autism. But at a minimum, he's made $10 million on that invention, and probably on the order of magnitude of 17, depending on what assumptions you make. And I've done a very exhaustive analysis. It's a lot of statistics. What we have, the modern form of corruption isn't people with the mafia and payoffs and cash in a suitcase. It's patterns of institutional corruption, where you have very polite, civil, respectable people doing things and put in positions to do things that feed the interests of the bureaucracies and the corporations that they're a part of. It's an economy of influence, and everybody scratches everybody else's back, and it is all around us. Someone once said, I think Stephen King was watching the evening news, and he said, I've just spent a week watching the evening news, and I've just decided that every one of them is an extended infomercial for the pharmaceutical industry, because you ultimately get the news that your advertisers pay for in the long run. So you have the revolving door from the agencies to the pharmaceutical companies. You have payoffs between the pharmaceutical companies and inventors and experts. Paul Offit invented the vaccine, made millions. It also provided millions to his lab. He then instantly became an expert on autism. Gee, I wonder why. Why did you care about autism, Paul? Well, maybe it's a threat to your industry. Maybe it's a threat to all your colleagues. And he's become a spokesperson. And he lies. He makes things up. Methyl mercury is a gentle bacteria. Children can get 100,000 vaccines. Paul, I'd like to see you get 1,000 in one sitting.
I think he said 10,000.
10,000 is actually 100,000. And he said 10,000 was his conservative estimate. Actually, in theory, you could go to 100,000. So I could go on and on. But, I think it's hard to imagine with commercialization of Congress, the lack of accountability of the agencies. How do we stop the corruption? We all have to fight. Every single person in this room should get up and do something, because if we don't do something, no one will do it. Call your congressman, fight, get involved. Don't sit back and this is destroying a generation of children. Half of American children have a chronic health condition. If the people don't rise up, this is why we have unusual people getting votes in presidential. Everyone is saying something is broken in Washington and we need to fix it. And we don't all agree on who's going to fix it or how to fix it, but it is broken. And it is this pattern of corruption, of inside the beltway, self-dealing, and real damage being visited on all, and it's not just autism, it's all kinds, it's veterans, it's other problems. It's endless wars, but you know, we need change. Everybody needs to fight for change.
Brian Hooker, maybe you can just encapsulate some of these questions I have kind of rapid fire. How many days and hours over what span did you speak to Dr. Thompson? Have you spoken to him since he knew you reported him? How do you act about that? Will you be surprised if he recants or recasts what he said?
I spoke to Dr. Thompson over a period of 10 months, approximately from November 2013 until September 2014. When he found out that I had actually recorded him, and I went from my home state of California, where it's illegal to do what I did, and drove up to Oregon, which is about 2.5 hours away, he laughed uproariously and thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And unfortunately, one of the things I had asked Dr. Thompson to do in September of 2014 was to leave the CDC and bring this all to an end so he could come forward, come public, talk to Congress, talk to the press directly. He chose not to. Dr. Thompson has been handled and will most likely submit a revised version of his analysis and try to absolve the MMR vaccine in May of 2016. This is typical of what we've seen at the CDC. The CDC analyzes data, and when they see an effect that they don't like, they reanalyze data and the effect goes away. The CDC has done this historically, from Agent Orange to thimerosal, now to the MMR vaccine. And so I did not want this to come, but I certainly anticipated that while he was in the CDC, the day would come. In exchange for what Dr. Thompson is doing, I believe, and this is a little bit shaky, but I believe that he will get his own Autism Research Foundation, and so there has been some very, very dubious activities that went on. Because he stayed in the CDC, he also got a major cash award from the CDC for maintaining his employment. He said until he qualified for retirement, but there are a lot of things that have happened since the last conversation that I had with Dr. Thompson, which was in September of 2014. And I do want to warn you, and I do want to anticipate this, but again, it's the same thing that we've heard and we've seen from an agency that's been completely captured by the pharmaceutical industry and is there not to tell the truth, but in order to manipulate the public, in order to do what they think the best thing to do is for society.
Seneff, you're a research scientist. Can you comment on the conflicted research environment, whether it's in medical schools or universities? Have you been part of that world or made observations about it?
The research environment is definitely geared towards being quiet about anything that's not going to support the pharmaceutical industry and the agrochemical industry. I am especially concerned about the agrochemical industry, which is really also part of that same mafia. They are making sure that the research doesn't happen that shows that their products come to harm. And I'm very concerned about the food in this country and the contamination of the food with the chemical glyphosate, which is in Roundup, and Roundup is pervasive in our environment, and its usage on crops has gone up exponentially in step with the exponential rise in autism. It's a perfect match. I think that the glyphosate is working synergistically with the MMR vaccine to cause harm. And this is why the MMR vaccine has much more, we have like 6 times as many hospitalizations in the second half of the data compared to the first half. And many other symptoms are much more common, statistically significantly more common in the second half compared to the first half. And that's because the second half is when we have a lot more glyphosate, I think. So that's the angle I'm working on. I am working, with a group of people who are mostly retired, people who actually are getting paid to work in academia, typically don't dare go into the space that I'm going into right now. Particularly Monsanto is a very big threat, and the entire pharmaceutical industry has to be affected. about the future of this country. The tragedy that's happening with our children is just unbelievable to me. And the fact that the industry, that the government says this is not a problem, I don't understand that. Most of the research on autism is going towards genetics because that's a safe topic. The chemical industry is absolved. Oh, these kids had some kind of gene that caused their autism. They want you to believe that so that we can't point a finger at all these chemicals that are in our environment and that are destroying our children. The vaccines are a big part of it, and I think the food industry is also responsible for all the chemicals that they use to control the bees, to control the insects. These toxic chemicals are getting in the food and they cause harm.
Polley Tommey, I want you to be able to say anything you want, but I'm going to start by asking, one thing I've heard from parents of autistic children is they're concerned about who will care for my child when I'm gone. They start to realize as the child's teenager and be above, maybe they figured out how to manage, maybe the best word, their life with this child or now adult. But they wonder who will do this when I'm gone. I mean, I'm sure, and you've addressed this before, but that's a concern.
Yeah, I mean, every parent's fear of what's going to happen when we're not around. And I have to say, actually, that brings me on to a very good subject, because for the first time in 18 years, our family managed to spend a few days together. We couldn't bring Billy or Kent, our new member of our family, because they both have vaccine injury, and that's the way it goes with it. But sitting in the audience are Bella and Toby, and I think that people don't realise siblings is huge. In fact, it's I think worse for them than it is for the parents, because they see their brother and sister and the pain of their brother and sister and everything that goes through with the medical damage there. And then on top of it, they see their parents, the bit where we're so exhausted that we snap at them, the bit where we unconsciously tell them they have to do well because their brother can't do well. The constant pressure on siblings around the world is something that's not covered and needs to be covered. And the answer to your question is many siblings feel that they will be the lifelong carers when we're not around. I had one young man write an article saying, "Who will ever marry me when I will be living with my very severe autistic brother?" My son Toby once said to me, "Is there any point going to college, seeing as I'm going to be looking after Billy?" Yes, there is. It's a point. I see in front of me the very best minds and brains of parents with fantastic organisations, and every single one of them has the same story as we have, and they could be sitting right here in this chair saying the same thing as me now. And please, can you stand up, because this is about you. We've made this
And number two, as a physician, I'm seeing a tremendous amount of inflammatory bowel disease. I'm seeing 5-year-olds and ulcerative 10-year-olds on these very powerful suppressants. It's extremely upsetting. And is this all, is there any idea as to why we're seeing so much of this as well, similar to what we're seeing in the autism disease?
Thank you as a physician coming in the first place. Let me reiterate the question. I'll turn around to the first. Is the explosion of inflammatory bowel disease in pediatric populations. Crohn's disease in children was unheard of before the 1960s. Unheard of. And one of the way I got into this is we looked at measles virus and measles vaccine, because we were concerned that the uptake of measles vaccine may in some way be related to inflammatory bowel disease. And we published a paper in the Lancet that wasn't retracted, which showed that there was a dramatic increase in for the risk of Crohn's disease if you had the vaccine compared with natural infection. And that was the beginning of an exploration of that. But that led parents to call me and say, my child has similar symptoms.